speaker today is no stranger to Greenville. He's been a fixture in some ways over the past year, appearing at events and organizing rallies and giving presentations on censorship and reproductive rights and LGBTQ rights throughout the county. He's worked as a teacher of middle school and high school students in New Orleans. Josh developed his passion for advocating for education equity and protecting the rights of children. In New Orleans, he also saw how systems work together to maintain a racial hierarchy. He graduated with honors from Columbia Law School, interned with the Public Defender's Office in New Orleans, the Mississippi Center for Justice, and the New York Civilian Review Board. He joined the ACLU of South Carolina in 2021 and has been working pretty hard for us ever since then, trying to undo the crazy. So Josh, thank you for joining us today, and you're up.
Can y'all hear me? Or should I mic up here? Mic up or how's this? Not on. How's this? Hey everyone, my name is Josh Malkin, he, him pronouns, senior advocacy specialist for the ACLU of South Carolina. Before we get started, and I take you all with me to this fueled rants, I want to thank a few people in this room. Pamela Askew, who is standing right next to me, I don't know what her official title is for her office because she does everything. She steadies the ship, and my colleagues and I would be completely lost with everything she does. So please join me in thanking my incredible colleague, Pam. Amanda McDougall Scott, the first person who truly welcomed me to South Carolina. She has been a constant thought partner and advocacy since I've been here. Anytime you've gotten an email about censorship, it is likely because she has obliged my pestering. So thank you to Amanda for all you do. And then literally not half an hour ago, I told the man who runs the House Dems for South Carolina that I was in the most progressive part of the state. And I mean that. Yes. I mean that. So to everyone who is part of PFLAG, the Greenville chapter of the NAACP, the Greenville chapter of the League of Women Voters, the Greenville Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, your advocacy and your passion very much serves as a template for not only the rest of the upstate, but for the state. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you to Greenville for all you do to advocate. A very quick nosedive. A few disclaimers. I was on the road from midnight to 8 a.m. this morning. So if something I'm saying seems incoherent, you're right. Please raise your hand and stop. Disclaimer number 2, now that you're all trapped in this room with me, I may be the most cynical person in South Carolina. And there are 2 reasons for that. Me trying to make excuses for myself, perhaps. One is also being a lawyer, but spending my time at the State House and out in communities. I spent almost my entire life tracking how the conservative legal movement, the conservative think tanks, and the conservative radical grassroots groups work together to advance this radical populist agenda. So not all of my colleagues and counterparts have that luxury. I think also my brain is just a little less capable of producing serotonin than some others in the work, but you will likely leave here feeling more depressed and dejected than you did when you did. So Laura, my promise to you is I'm happy to refer you to a colleague or a counterpart who is more optimistic than I am. I would also say please, I do have a silver lining at the end of this talk, so if I haven't gotten to it, please make sure it's one of the questions that I asked. The world they would like to see, we'll get there, but I want to start with the world we have now, and by that I don't actually mean the world we have now, I mean the world before like pre-Trump populism. Right. And that world was always unequal. Our systems have just evolved throughout time to marginalize the same communities. I spent 5 years teaching Black and Honduran students in New Orleans, and they just never had a chance of accessing the opportunities I had. I went to a public school in a progressive part of New York State. I got a paragraph about MLK, and I got a paragraph about Rosa Parks. Let's not pretend like our education of Black history was ever really a thing, right? Black students in Greenville are 8 times more likely to be referred to police in school than their white counterparts. I've spent a lot of time recently thinking about the homophobia that pervaded my adolescence. And I had a close family member who knew he was gay when he was in 3rd grade. And despite having an extremely affirming, loving family, he did not come out until 9th grade, right? So amidst that culture of homophobia and toxic masculinity, he spent 6 years unable to be his true self. So that is kind of the world, I think, pre-populism, right? Always unequal. The world I would like to see, right? Josh, radical ACU, the world I would like to see is a world where we acknowledge that and take steps to remedy, right? Our systems are unequal. Let's acknowledge that and give more to those who have been given less, right? Rather than send our Black students to the police, let's really think about what trauma-informed pedagogy is. Let's emphasize social emotional learning. Let's make sure there are mental health practitioners in schools. What is the answer? School resource officers. That's the answer that's been given to us. So just another system that is going to exacerbate the marginalization of Black students, of young women, of queer students. Yeah, so I would love to, my passion is truly educational equity, right? How do we take, what can we do for students who for generations, their families have been systemically marginalized? How can we truly intervene to disrupt the systems that have been in place for the entire history of this country? That is the world I wish I could be fighting for. It's not. It's not right now in South Carolina, right? I wish I could be my radical pro-equity self out there advocating for equity. But I'm not. I spend the majority of my time defending the pre-Trump discriminatory status quo. Because what is the other side doing right now? All they can to create the world they want to see, right? And what does that world include? That world includes erasing the de minimis amount of Black history our students learn right now. That includes making sure that trans children don't have access to healthcare, that women don't have access to healthcare, that gay children don't have access to the mental health services that they need. It's really, and yeah, it's really sad. It's really sad. And it's really, I don't want to give them credit ever, but a lot of it, I think, comes down to it's not always the most educated crowd. Right? I think at the top they really are. I want to say, like, the folks who run Moms for Liberty and folks who run Americans for Prosperity, I think they're extremely intelligent. I think they message extremely well, but I think their base doesn't, right? And what they're doing to their base is they're saying, here's this thing you don't understand. You don't understand what it means to be transgender because no one who's cisgender understands what it means to be transgender. So let's attack that, right? Like that's our God says this isn't okay. So let's attack that. Our public schools are not up to the caliber that some folks would like. What's the answer? It's sending money to private schools that won't be held accountable, that can discriminate in their admissions. It's putting God back in schools, right? I don't have problems with religion, but when you hear that phrase, putting God back in schools, whose God are we putting back in schools? Not to fearmonger, because I think this is real. I think this is real. But I mean, there's a bill currently filed in the South Carolina General Assembly with 45 Republican sponsors that says the 10 Commandments must be posted in every single classroom.
Oh,
Yeah. Right. So again, they're extremely smart. The way they work is incrementally. They throw things. They're on record saying this. They throw things at the wall to see what sticks. So, I'm 3 months into the job at the ACLU, running around like a chicken with my head cut off, and someone from Nationals reaches out, and they're like, "Josh, have you seen that there's this bill in South Carolina that would mandate 'In God We Trust' be placed in every classroom?" And I'm like, "You've never been to South Carolina." Everyone is praying before any meeting. I'm not going to take that bill on. Right, and now as I think about it, that was the incremental first step to this 10 Commandments bill. And this will eventually get up to a Supreme Court. Right, thinking about these relationships between advocacy and community as legal, this will get up to a Supreme Court that is leaning much more towards free exercise of religion, which in their minds means the ability to discriminate, than separation of church and state. Right? So what happens when that, when that bill passes the South Carolina General Assembly? So all to say, the world they want to see is imposing their extremely narrow religious world vision on everyone. Right? And that's, what I realize I'm all over the place. Please, sleep deprivation. When Roe came down, Justice Kavanaugh said in his concurrence, "There is no way we will ever come for interstate travel. Interstate travel is a fundamental right. We won't do that. We won't come for contraception." Right? Whereas Justice Thomas is out there saying, "Yeah, we're going to come for contraception, we're going to come for gay marriage." But Justice Kavanaugh says, "We won't come for interstate travel." And as Laura told you, 19 Republican attorney generals have written this letter saying, "No, we need to have the ability to track medical records across state lines." So I frequently have the conversation with folks who have happier lives than I do about some elements of this. For example, the censorship bill. Folks, especially when we were first starting, said, "Josh, the language of this censorship bill isn't so bad." Right? You read it, especially in intelligent folks, well-read folks. You read the language of that bill, it doesn't seem that bad. I'll tell you, the language is bad. The language is very much anti-equity. But less important than the language is the animus that drives it, which we're already seeing play out across South Carolina. Right? And in Pickens, they banned stamped racism, anti-racism, and you off of identical language. In Lexington, Richland 5, some of you might have seen, an AP English teacher was just prohibited from teaching a lesson on systemic racism because a white student said, "Isn't it illegal to talk about systemic racism in South Carolina?" And they won't stop. So some folks are like, "Josh, we need the censorship bill to pass now because they can get worse." And my retort is, what do you think's coming next when they pass this censorship bill? If they pass this censorship bill, and now because it's hard to frame this as a win, we're not the most regressive state in the country. When folks talk about like the most radical states, it's Florida, Texas, Tennessee. So we can look to these states to see what's coming next. So I know that if they pass this censorship bill, they take up a bill that criminalizes librarians. They bring up a bill that, you know, again, the bathroom ban. I would be shocked if we don't soon see legislation criminalizing gay marriage. Right? From the bench, Justice Thomas is saying there is no constitutional right to an abortion. And because that right doesn't exist, the right to contraception doesn't exist, the right to gay marriage doesn't exist, and conveniently, he doesn't mention interracial marriage. All that, I hope this is more coherent than it sounds coming out of my mouth. All this to say is like, there's very much a movement, a growing movement to attack anything that is not white, patriarchy, heteronormativity, cisgenderism, right? Everything. Christianity, right? And a narrow view of Christianity, right? Not everyone's Christianity, this very narrow view of Christianity. Yeah, so I think that is unfortunately, I can't really truly advocate for equity and the things I want to be out there advocating for, because there is this very real effort to impose wills on bodies, on minds, on learning. And I feel like I can't not do what I can to stop that train. Josh, where's the silver lining? Thank you. We're in South Carolina. We're in South Carolina. That censorship bill that flew through Southeastern legislatures in the first year, in 21-22, that's still not law in South Carolina. There is no ban on gender affirming care in South Carolina. There is no book ban bill in South Carolina. There is no parental bill of rights, which is the forced outing of children in South Carolina. So in a lot of states with similar partisan makeups, those bills flew through thanks to the advocacy of folks across this state. We've been able to stop a lot of the world they want to see. I'm a very firm believer in like shouldn't talk more than 12 minutes at a time. I don't know where I am with that, but I think that I'm ready for questions if y'all are ready. Please.
How many Joshes are out there? Yeah.
I'll tell you, so at the State House, there are a good group of 6 or 7 of us, you know, the Women's Right and Empowerment Network, League of Women Voters, Planned Parenthood, SC United for Justice and Equality. We do have a good little core at the State House. And then what's been so refreshing for me personally is I live on the road. I spend a lot of my time getting to speak with and meet great folks with you all. Folks pick up the mantle in their community, right? So I don't think I mentioned the Freedom in Libraries Advocacy Group, which many of you may be familiar with. It started with me and 3 other folks sitting around the table after the library director demanded that Pride displays come down in 2022. And that group, which has been fighting this ridiculously hard fight for over a year now, has not only been winning the fight, been preventing the library board and county council from enacting their explicitly transphobic agenda, but they've also just formed this beautiful community, right? This beautiful pro-literacy community. So, I hope I love the answer to your question. Okay. I view my role as sharing information from the State House and then always being around to answer questions for folks who are wanting to fight the fight or engage locally. For those of you who are not familiar with the library board situation in Greenville, there are certainly folks in this room who are. So if you you know, they need all the help they can get. That fight has been nasty for over a year now. Laura.
So do you have any insights into what the state Supreme Court is going to do with the abortion bill?
I don't. I caught a few minutes of that hearing where, who is it, Justice Kearns? Someone else may have a better idea, or he seemed upset that the legislature was bringing this again. So that moment gave me a little bit of hope, but I don't know. In the back.
We hear a lot of talk about what's going to happen, the bad things that happen to the women who have abortion, what they're going to do for the doctors that perform the abortion. But we don't hardly ever hear anything about the males that contributed to the pregnancy.
Yeah, I would love to hear some of the male leadership response to that argument, and I will tell you some of the female senators brought that up. But I mean, again, we're living in this patriarchy where we can't see that it's the same thing, right? We can't. Yeah.
Josh, other than donate ACLU and do other parts of the work that you're doing, as you've mentioned, those various groups, is there a place to volunteer with ACLU?
Yes. So if I'm actually in charge of really solidifying and developing the contours for our volunteer program. So I don't have any cards on me, but I will make sure my email address gets out. So if you were interested in being an ACLU volunteer, we will have some sort of get together in the upstate soon to figure out what that program should look like to be most beneficial to folks who want to be involved with it.
Do you see any political will towards judicial reform? The judicial selection process and how you know, insane that whole, how much power the legislature has over it. Do you see any blowback?
There's certainly a lot of talk about it. The resounding answer I seem to hear from legislators is this isn't a good system, but it's better than all the other bad systems. So I know it is a priority for many legislators and officials in the state, so I think we might see some movement there. It's not something we engage with directly as of now, but you know, part of that movement is asking legislators to cede some of their power,
Exactly. Yeah.
which they are not prone to do. Please.
Could you comment on our Greenville County legislative delegation and who perhaps is approachable, or what is an effective way to go about approaching these people, knowing that you're not going to change them basically philosophically? What is the way to approach them?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. And two thoughts here, so please make sure I answer your actual question. I didn't make this disclaimer at the beginning, I don't think, but I wanted to. Like, I don't like framing groups as monoliths, right? So I am firmly opposed to what Moms for Liberty stands for. I am firmly opposed to what the Freedom Caucus stands for. But as for individual members, you know, I think it's irresponsible. They're engaged with these groups, but I can't speak to some individual members I don't know about, but not all. But I will say there is a humongous difference between some members of the Greenville County Legislative Delegation. There is a big difference between an Adam Morgan and a Jason Elliott. And at the end of the day, this is a big, you know, I hope this isn't recorded. My girlfriend will get angry at me. They will vote the same way, right? At the end of the day, they will vote the same way. But Jason Elliott is not going to be advocating and actively championing the same racist, queerphobic agenda that Adam Morgan's whole platform is.
Right.
So I think that needs to be said. And I think to get to your other point, conversations always need to be had, right? Because it's very hard to switch a vote. For the overwhelming majority of folks in the General Assembly, it's very, very difficult to change a vote. But what could you maybe do is you prevent a bill from even getting to hearing, right? You could get someone from a staunch proponent to a passive yes vote, and that matters. That matters. So I think folks always need to be hearing from their constituents. I advocate that we are always the patient, the persistent, and passionate folks in the room. But they need to hear from their constituents. They need to hear their stories. They need to hear why these matters, these issues, these bills are so important to you all. And again, winning looks different depending on where you are in the state. But that legislator could very well leave that conversation thinking about the issue differently, and that's a win, and it needs to happen. Did I answer your question? Okay. Please.
The last time we had a meeting, it was about LGBTQ rights, and they talked about 4 bills that were pending in South Carolina. One opposing counseling for LGBTQ youth, and another one having to do with health care. So where do those stand? I had the impression that maybe the legislature just ran out of time and hadn't quite pushed them through yet.
Yes. I'm not familiar with the counseling bill. Gender affirming care.
You know, they just gonna come up next year and
Yes.
then have to
There's very much that possibility. Gender affirming care, I want to say, is ready for debate in the full Senate. It hasn't gone through the House yet. And then the Parental Bill of Rights, which is also an attack on queer kids for the most part. That bill is still in the subcommittee process. So again, thinking about what other states did and how quickly they did it, we're nowhere near them. Do we need to be hyper vigilant about this upcoming year? Absolutely. And another silver lining is, you know, the populist agenda has so many issues on it that they have not yet ticked off in South Carolina. They don't have time to get to all of it, right? So there's also, yes, silver lining. There's also the question, like, how much time will our General Assembly spend debating bills that have been found to be unconstitutional elsewhere? Yeah, I mean, the answer is maybe all of it, right? But then we know, I may know some lawyers who are ready to sue when that happens. Please.
Why is an issue like trans less than 1% of the population, but must take up 95% of the oxygen in the room? That just amazes me. That particularly if it's so low and so tight, and yet it's the biggest boogeyman on the country.
So yeah, 2 thoughts here. I mean, after Roe fell, what do they have to energize their base? Right. And again, I think I mentioned this earlier. What is it? The American Legal Enterprises, which is one of these radical right-wing legal think tanks. He said we throw things at the wall to see what sticks. Right. So, you know, when they first tried the bathroom ban back in 2016, it only passed in North Carolina, didn't stick. But then, unfortunately, right, folks saw Leah Thomas, the swimmer at UPenn, and they saw an opportunity to demonize and other trans individuals. And now that very much seems to be like the issue that is appealing to this base, and will go from, unfortunately, the anti-trans women's sports bill did pass in South Carolina, even though only 5 athletes have ever applied for a waiver. The time is applied, but you know, again, they're never done. So gender affirming care, right? It's now gender affirming care. And again, I think we have a lot of folks, there are a lot of folks on both sides of the aisle who don't, myself included, we don't know what it means to be transgender. We don't know what it feels like to be transgender. It's not our identity.
That's right.
But the difference is, do you attack what you don't understand? Or do you try to listen and learn about what you don't understand? Right? So the world that I want to live in is when we actively seek out ways to learn about identities other than our own and do what we can to help those who have been systematically marginalized. What the other side is doing is the exact opposite, right? Can you believe this? This is not, we don't understand this, and we're gonna demonize it. And I mean, I view gender affirming care as transgenocide. I mean, I really think like we are not telling a trans child they can't have access to the healthcare they need to be their healthy, authentic selves, with their parents' permission. It's transgenocide in my opinion.
What's an example of when the ACLU in South Carolina might file a lawsuit?
Great question. So we are a small office. Pamela and I are about 25% of the office. But when Pickens ban stands racism and anti-racism in you, we filed a lawsuit. The federal redistricting suit, the ACLU is in on. Wow, Pamela, today's like so long ago. The mask mandate, yes, the mask mandate. We're in on the mask mandate.
Did you send a letter to the library board? Did you send a letter?
Oh, I sure did. Yeah, that's more of me just being pissed off at the library. But I'm in our office is small, which is nice because I'm in very close contact with our legal team. We look for these really obvious fact patterns that lend themselves to lawsuits. So it Pickens when folks get up there and say this book is trash, this book is indoctrination, the school board ignores multiple review committees' recommendations. That's ripe for a lawsuit, and we sued on it.
Josh?
Yeah.
One more question. We got to be friends because of the mask lawsuit, thankfully. It's been a beautiful friendship. But can you also speak a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing with the school boards as well, and all of the stuff you've been watching go across the state on that?
Yeah. So I don't know how familiar folks are with Moms for Liberty. Radical group that came about first in Florida in response to mask mandates, Moms for Liberty, right? They have ties to a lot of political money. And after the mask mandate issue stopped, they had to throw things at the wall and see what was next. And what was next was critical race theory. Right? So we've been dealing with that at the state level for the last 2 years, and some school boards, because school boards are harder to keep an eye on, some school boards have banned critical race theory. They don't know what that means, so they ban it. Right, so Berkeley for sure, Morey for sure. And then, as they try to figure out how to pass the classroom censorship bill, we're now seeing book bans explode across the state. And what happens is typically these folks, Moms for Liberty, or like-minded, will storm it, and they will say, "You are giving pornography to minors. You're in violation of this law." I promise you, they've never read the law, because the law says this only applies to books with pictures, and there are a few, right? There are a few. I don't know if folks are familiar with the gender queer crisis back years ago, but it doesn't apply to books that are words only. It doesn't apply to schools and libraries. It doesn't apply to schools and libraries. So they come in, they say, Autumn, you have this book in your library, your whatever hateful name they want to say, we're going to call the sheriff, you're in violation of state law. And if you're a school board member, I don't necessarily blame you for either one, not knowing what the actual law is, or just being terrified. Right? A lot of people out there think, okay, if we acquiesce, if we give in to this one demand, they'll stop. I'm here to tell you unequivocally, they're not stopping. So when I see this pop up anywhere in the state, I'm going to fight it at every single juncture. Because I'm not someone who says, oh, Josh, the censorship bill is reasonable, and once they do this, I'm sure they'll come down. They have a laundry list, right? And we now have the benefit of seeing what's coming down the pipeline from states that have already advanced these kind of regressive, anti-education, anti-belonging bills.